Hey there, LDS music enthusiast. Like me, I bet you're super excited that the church is finally releasing new hymns from the upcoming new hymnal. I'm Dr. Doug Pugh, and as a professional composer who loves writing church music for many denominations, I've had a big question in mind with regard to our new LDS hymnal, and that is, how's the quality of these hymns? It's my hope that we're raising the bar in our worship music, as we do in all areas of the church. And to help us find out if this is happening for sure, I'm going to do a review of each new selection as they come out. And during these reviews, I'm going to point out some great music writing tips so you can use them in your own music. In this particular video, I'm going to review the first new selection of the hymnal, the one we've all been expecting, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. I'm going to highlight 5 powerful music techniques featured in this hymn. So let's get started. Technique number 1 is making the tonic chord more interesting. Now here you can see we have the sheet music for Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Now in hymns like this, there's not a lot of wild harmonies. It's pretty much simple, mostly diatonic harmonies. Sometimes we can run into problems in situations like this of monotony or monotone kind of sounding chords. So something that I love to do, and I'm glad to see it's been done in this arrangement of Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, is to use inversions to make basic chords more interesting. So you can see here at the very beginning, we're in D major. We start with the 1 chord, we go to the 5 chord, we come back to the 1 chord on Fount of, 2 normal 1 chords, but then on Every, we get 2 more 1 chords, but look at the change. First, on the Ev of Every, we get a root position, then we get this beautifully stretched out first inversion chord of the 1 chord with the F sharp in the bass. That just makes the 1 chord so much more interesting, instead of just pounding the same chord over and over again. So whenever you're in a spot where you think, is my harmony too monotonous? This is the first thing I always try. Can I add an inversion of that chord with a different note in the bass to make it more interesting? And then it happens again in the very next measure on Tune My Heart. Same technique. We take root position 1 chord to first inversion 1 chord. This time it's the higher F sharp instead of the lower F sharp. But the same principle applies. So remember, if your harmony is sounding a little monotonous, but you can't go wild and add a bunch of crazy chords to it, try adding some inversions of that chord. Technique number 2 is an eternal voice leading principle that makes your writing rich and delicious. First of all, what is voice leading? Well, voice leading is the smooth horizontal connection from chord to chord. When we're writing music, we need to think vertically and we need to think horizontally. A common problem I see with my students is only thinking vertically. No matter what instrument you're writing on, whether you write guitar and voice as a singer-songwriter, or whether you're writing at the piano, or you write choral music, or hymns, or any style of writing, it's important to think about both the harmony, the chord vertically, but also how 1 chord connects to the next in each voice, and that's what voice leading is. So the eternal voice leading principle I want to point out that's used so well at the beginning of this hymn is that after we take a large leap in one voice, it's best to step in the opposite direction. And you can see, as I've highlighted in blue down here, that the bass line does just that. We get this 3 Ds in a row in that first full measure, then we get a very big leap of a 6th. Now, the general voice leading rule is, which really comes from old school counterpoint rules, which is like the principles of the gospel of voice leading, so to speak, is the bigger the leap you take in a voice, the more you should step in the opposite direction afterwards. So tapping on to technique number 1, this bass line where we go from root position to first inversion to make it more interesting, in this case it caused a big leap. But the arranger of this hymn, I don't know who it is, but they did a great job. They leapt down to that F sharp, and knowing that it's a big leap, they stepped in the opposite direction. This is a voice leading principle you can count on. So remember, the bigger the leap you take, the more you want to step in the opposite direction. Technique number 3 is contrary motion cadences. Well, let's break that down a little bit. First of all, what's a cadence? A cadence is musical punctuation. At the end of every sentence when you're writing an email or a letter, you need some punctuation, a period or an exclamation point. Sometimes you need a comma. Sometimes you need a semicolon or something like that. Well, we also have musical punctuation, and that's what we do at the end of a phrase. The chords that we use to end the phrase convincingly. All right, so we're going to look at this opening cadence at the end of the first line. Now, I mentioned that this is a contrary motion cadence. What do I mean by contrary motion? Well, we're looking at the soprano line and the bass line here. The soprano goes F sharp, E, D, while the bass line goes B, C sharp, D. So they end on an octave together, but they get there from opposite directions. The bass going up, the soprano coming down. Contrary motion between those two voices. In music, there's several types of motion. There's the contrary motion. We have what's called similar motion, where if both voices are moving in the same direction, similar motion. Sometimes similar motion turns into what we call parallel motion if the voices are moving in the same direction by the same interval. And that's the kind of motion that can sometimes get you into trouble. But we'll talk about that later. And the fourth type is something called oblique motion, which is where one voice stays the same, repeats the notes while the other voice moves. The two safest types of motion are contrary motion and oblique motion. They help you avoid mistakes and errors that kind of destroy the resonance of your music. So you want to use contrary motion and oblique motion as much as you can without destroying the flavor of the music you're going for. So in this particular case, we're ending our phrase with a nice authentic cadence, meaning we're ending with the 5 chord going to the 1 chord, but we do so with this nice bass motion coming up by step while the upper voice is coming down by step. This is an incredibly smooth, nice, leading us home kind of voice leading to make our cadence very pleasing. Technique number 4 is using the main melody motive as a part of the bass line. So when we get down to the third line of this hymn on the words, "Teach me some melodious sonnet," the bass line here on this line changes. The way this hymn is structured is the melody is the same on lines 1 and line 2, and if I remember correctly, almost the same, if not identical, on line 4. But the third line is the contrasting line. So in the spirit of something contrasting, not only does the melody change, but so does the bass line. What I love about this opening of this third line is the 3 opening notes in the bass line are the 3 opening notes of the melody from the beginning of the song. Come thou fount, pardon my disgusting voice, I have a bit of a cold, but then we get down here to the bass line, and while the soprano is going, teach me some, the bass is going, come thou fount, but of course these words, teach me some, but we get the melody motive, the opening 3-note motive in the bass line. This is so great. It's kind of a subliminal technique. We don't always pick up on this at a first listen. Your congregation will probably never notice that kind of a thing. But what it does is it gives a beautiful, cohesive connection between different voices of your music. This is counterpoint at some of its finest, when you take melodic motives from the melody and you insert them into other voices like the bass here to create a really cohesive structure. This is a great technique. And for our 5th and final technique, we're going to look at what I call warm, fuzzy chord substitutions. What do I mean by warm, fuzzy? You know that feeling you get when a certain chord gives you that feeling? It's that kind of warm, fuzzy, delicious, ooh feeling. That's what I mean here. So the arrangement of this hymn in the hymn book now, the new hymnal, is a little bit different than the one that was in the old orange hymnal before the 1985 hymnal. There are several versions of this hymn in many different hymnals. And at this particular point, again, on the third line of this hymn, what we hear in many other versions is on beat 2 of this measure, where the blue highlight is on melodious, we often hear a 3 chord there. So the music, I've written right next to it what notes you might see there. You often hear a 3 chord there that goes to a 4 chord. Okay, but instead, this arranger did not use the 3 chord, and they moved one note to make this juicy change. Instead of the tenor singing a C, which would be parallel fifths anyway, we'll talk more about parallel fifths another time, but instead of going to that 3 chord, it's still a 1 chord, but the melody note does not fit the normal 1 chord. There's no C sharps in a D major chord, unless you're counting the 7th. So he takes the 1 chord on some and then makes melodious start on a 1-7 chord, or a first inversion of a 1-7 chord, and it creates this beautiful, warm, fuzzy feeling. Hear the difference between the 3 chord and this 1-7 chord in first inversion. Here's the version with the 3 chord. It has a bit of a melancholy, the 3 chord. Now, the 1 major 7. Ooh. It has that tang on it because of the interval of the major 7th between the tenor and the soprano. That stepping down to that C sharp while the bass goes up to first inversion to go from 1 to 1-7 in first inversion is so nice. It also prepares the tenors beautifully for the 4 chord, so we don't have any illegal parallels, which can happen very easily when you have 2 root position chords next to each other and the bass is stepping. That's like the number one place where people mess up and do illegal parallels, which destroy the resonance of your music. If the tenor had been a C sharp, that would have happened. But because it's a D, it doesn't happen. We avoid the resonance sapping parallel fifth, and instead we fill it with extra resonance with a 1 chord with a major 7th on it. Oh, just listen one more time. It sounds so nice. Oh, love it. Great technique. Warm, fuzzy chord substitution. So, what's my opinion of this hymn? Honestly, I'm glad it's back. It's a real favorite. And even though it's more technically of a song than a traditional hymn, this very hymn-like version that they've put in the book will work really well on the organ. It'll work really well in the voices of our congregations, too. My personal favorite part is the last line of the last verse. Every time I hear this, I hear Elder Maxwell when I read this line. He quoted it in a favorite conference talk of mine. It's such a wonderful plea to the Lord. Here's my heart. Oh, take and seal it. Seal it for thy courts above. Beautiful. So I'm very glad they've included this hymn in the new hymnal. It's a winner. If you'd like to download my complete harmonic analysis that I've done of this hymn, as you saw a minute ago, you can do so. I've put the link in the description below. It's a free download, no strings attached. I hope you'll enjoy it. And if you'd like to get my Dr. Doug's 10 Commandments for writing great LDS church music, it's also free, and there's a link down in the description box below. My hope is that these free tips will help you as you work on music that you want to write for your sacrament meeting, whether it be a hymn arrangement or a reharmonization as you play the organ or any other type of music you might use in church. Be sure to watch the next video in our series of new LDS hymnal reviews. In the next one, we're going to look at Lane Johnson's song, When the Savior Comes Again.